I would argue that you should only have a counterplan when you have the judge for it. I have run counterplans in front of completely lay judges, and it went well. I don't think that a counterplan is the most counterintuitive thing in the world. Like, all you're saying is, I don't think they're doing this the best way, and if they're not, you wouldn't want to do it, because then you can't do it the best way. Right? People understand opportunity cost. They deal with it every day in their life. So the opportunity cost view of the counterplan is an intuitive way to explain it to lay judges. But that said, I wouldn't count on them getting that, especially when the 2AR gets 3 minutes to make new arguments that judge isn't going to catch, right? Like, if the 2AR gets 3 minutes to persuade the judge that counterplans are stupid, then probably not a good idea. But counterplan when you have the judge for it, counterplan when it gets you offense, and counterplan when it fits your disad, which is what we're going to talk about next. The counterplan disad combo. Now, this is common sense, but your counterplan can't link to your disad. Right? If you have a unique disad, that means that it doesn't link to the status quo. But if it links to your counterplan, why aren't we just advocating the status quo? Right? Does that, like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, why does it make any sense to spend a minute and a half reading a counterplan that doesn't get you a better world? Spend that minute and a half reading another unique disad. So, and I've seen it happen, I don't know how many times, people will just spend 3 minutes getting nowhere. I'm reading a disad with uniqueness, so this links to the status quo, but it doesn't matter because I'm not advocating the status quo. It's like, okay. That's a good way to lose the time war. I think that your counterplan should generally link turn the disad. Your counterplan should solve for the disad. It's like my senior year, I just loved the Consult Japan counterplan. Wasn't the best argument, and I think that if anybody had done any research, they would have figured out that Japan was probably going to rearm no matter what happened. But the counterplan was a link turn to a Japanese nationalism disad. So I could always just claim that even if they don't link to the disad, I'm solving for it, so it's a net benefit to the counterplan that you're not going to get by voting for the affirmative. They certainly don't solve for the disad. So instead of, like, we don't have a whole lot of time to read independent net benefits to counterplans. I think we should, right? If you have a net benefit to the counterplan that you can't get in the world of the affirmative, read it. But one of the best ways to do it is to let your disad count twice. My disad is both a reason to reject the affirmative because they caused the Japanese nationalists to go all samurai, but also the disad is a reason to vote for the counterplan because I ensure that the samurais fall on their sword, right? Or whatever.
So how do you play that game with uniqueness? Like, you're saying the status quo doesn't cause this thing and then the counterplan makes it super unique, or?
Yeah. Well, without talking about uniqueness counterplans yet, because that's where we're getting.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. The answer to your question is there's a problem, right? And you're hitting on it. And it's that if the impact's not going to happen in the SQO, then how do you solve for it? Right? Like, if the impact isn't happening now, then how does the counterplan claim it as a net benefit? I'd say two things. First is, most people aren't as smart as Mark, and they never caught on to that.
That's sad.
No, most people never caught on to that. I can tell you, I ran that counterplan disad combo all the time, and nobody ever said, how are you claiming that as an impact if it's not happening now? But the second is, good uniqueness evidence makes things very tentative on these types of debates. So the uniqueness evidence indicates that, the nationalists are meh. We don't know what they're going to do with Article 9. They may or may not have enough support. There's a risk that it could happen, but right now it doesn't look like it will. So I would claim, as a unique net benefit, we're moving them further away from this horrible, awful impact, right? Like, a step towards nuclear catastrophe is something you wouldn't want to take, but a step backwards is something that you would want to take. We could feel safer if we're an extra 6 yards from a cliff. And so that's how you can claim it as a net benefit on the counterclaim. That's the type of impact calculation that generally doesn't come up, but if it does, I feel comfortable claiming that as an impact, even though it's like we have probability issues. But the other thing is, it's kind of irrelevant if you're winning the link debate on the disad, right? Like if you're winning that they cause it, etc. But that's the point, right? And the third thing that your counterclaim needs to do when combining with the disad is to provide uniqueness to your disad. This lets you run lots of non-unique or tentatively non-unique disads, right? Japan was gonna rearm, and they're probably going to right now. Like, it's happening, thanks to Bush, in my opinion. But I could still run that disad knowing that lit exists, non-uniquing my disad, because my counterplan gave it uniqueness. There's not an option to vote for the status quo. There's not an option to vote for a world where the Japanese rearm except for the affirmative. I prevent it from happening on the negative, and it may or may not happen in the status quo. That's irrelevant. This also works really well with politics. If your link to politics is you're a liberal plan, and liberal plans cause X to happen, and then the counter plan is some crazy conservative plan, and that keeps it from happening by giving the conservatives more power or whatever, then at that point, the counter plan just gave the disad uniqueness. Whatever the scenario for the politics is could be happening in the SQO, maybe, maybe not. It may not be the most unique disad in the world. It may even be some sort of a linear disad, but because the counter plan exists in the round, that changes the entire uniqueness level of the debate. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, in the scenario you describe, in a lot of scenarios where you're using the counterplan to provide uniqueness to the disad, the permutation is going to restore that debate to where it's, again, non-unique. Because, like, if you're saying, like, well, we do it in this crazy conservative way to make the conservatives get popularity, well, the permutation includes this conservative plan, and so that's co-ops your politics.
Maybe. And I don't know. The argument could very well be that doing the liberal and conservative thing just pisses people off more. Right? I mean, it depends upon the disad, right? And strategically you have to think about those perm scenarios. But most of the time, the perm will link where the counterplan links less. Like most of the time, the perm won't completely neutralize the disad because there's still a level of a link in the perm where the counterplan doesn't link at all. So if the disad matters at all, it's almost, unless there's a link turn that we're losing on the disad, right, then I don't think there's ever a reason why the disad becomes a reason to reject or ignore the counterplan. Like I don't think a perm may or may not neutralize the uniqueness debate to an extent, but that depends upon the direction of the link. Right? So without like a concrete example, it'd be hard to examine that further. Does that make sense? Like, yeah.
Yeah, that's what you're saying.
On competitiveness, if the counterplan is not textually competitive or textually mutually exclusive, then it needs to solve for the affirmative better than the affirmative does. You see why? Like if the perm can happen, like if the perm is possible, then you need to make sure that